video, we'll review the steps of centering and opening the clay and shaping the clay to throw a mug. We'll also show you the process you must go through with leather hard work to finish your mug. Here you can see some leather hard pieces, parts for a mug and for a bowl that have been thrown and are ready to finish putting together. Eventually you may get interested enough in wheel throwing that you'll look into creating this kind of wheel thrown sculpture. This armadillo is entirely made from wheel thrown parts that have been centered, thrown, shaped on the wheel, and then in their leather hard state have been put together and decorated. Mugs can be made in a lot of varieties and shapes. It's a good idea always to decide ahead of time what exactly the form is going to be like when you're done. You want to shape the clay as the potter, as the creator. You don't want the clay to tell you where to go. Here you can see some well-designed mugs. There's travel mugs, there's regular cylindrical mugs, mugs that have more of a cup form. It's up to the artist to design his or her mug to his or her taste. As a review, let's remember that the first thing you want to do if you're throwing more than one piece is use a bat, because it's so much easier to lift a wet, gushy piece off the wheel when it's on a bat. Because bats don't always adhere to the bat pins without shifting, it's a good idea to put clay down on your wheel head in the shape of a wheel. Wet the clay a little bit, and then put your bat down. If you have a pressed wood bat, you'll want to dampen the bat first. If you have a plastic bat, don't wet the bat first. Okay, the artist is centering the clay. Here the artist has centered the clay and now is opening it up. Remember to pull the clay out of that bottom corner. You can do that by pulling past and then necking it in a little bit. That'll get the clay out of that inside corner so you don't have a really thick, heavy pot that blows up in the kiln. Sometimes after you've opened your clay, you'll do something that causes it to go a little off center. The artist is going to show you making a gate with his fingers and holding his right hand with a sponge to keep his fingers exactly the same distance apart, putting it back on center. You have to be really firm here. Make the clay conform to your very rigid fingers. So the left hand forms the two sides of the gate. The right hand with the sponge, index finger, forms the top of the gate. Here the artist is beginning to pull the... Notice that the artist has put an elephant ear sponge in his right hand as he makes that pull. Now, a lot of potters do this. It creates less friction on the wall, so it's easier to hold steady, and it also requires you to lose less water for lubrication. When you're thinking about the design of your mug, keep in mind our rules of good proportion. We don't want to do things that are going to divide a piece in half, so let's make sure that the That the lip and the body of the pot and the neck are in nice ratios to each other. The artist is using a wood modeling tool to create a decorative line. The lip's already been flared out a little bit. You don't want to over flare a mug because it'll become a dribble glass, but it needs some flair for good design. After you make a decorative line, use your sponge or your finger and smooth the edges a little so they're not too sharp. And don't forget to round and smooth the edges of your lip on your mug. You don't want a cup that's sharp and bumpy going into your mouth. Remember, you can use your wood modeling tool to trim the bottom corner where your finger is round and leaves a little bit of clay that you don't want on your piece. When you're all finished, use your wire cutter to separate your piece from the bat, but don't try to move it off the bat. Remove the whole bat and place it on a shelf or table until it's leather hard. The next project we wish you to view is wheel throwing a bowl. A well thrown bowl is even, it's got a beautifully flared lip, and it's got a thicker lip than most beginners want to make it. Remember that the water is going to evaporate out of the clay, and the lip's going to be even thinner than it looks when you're making it. If you want a really graceful, elegant form, leave the lip a little thicker, trim it perfectly even, and round the edges with your sponge and chamois. As with the mug, you want to begin your project by designing your bowl. You need to determine the form before you begin. You'll get a lot better at wheel throwing if you are deciding where you want to take the clay. The artist is centering the clay to begin his bowl. You'll notice that he's centering it much wider and lower than he did for the cylindrical form of the mug. He's ready to open and pull it out to start the wall. When you're making a bowl, don't square off that inside bottom corner. Go ahead and let your thumb create the inside slanting curve. And when you pull the wall, don't pull straight up. When you pull the walls for a bowl, pull out, up and out. Now don't undercut it too dramatically on the outside. If you do, your bowl will probably be in danger of collapsing. So leave a little extra clay down on that outside bottom corner. Leave that little skirt out a little bit. That'll support it. The important thing is to get a good inside curve to your bowl. Work really hard on being steady and even and precise on that inside part. If you have an air bubble in the clay, stop, pop it with your potter's needle, and squeeze the air out. The artist is using a potter's rib to help him true up that inside curve. You've probably heard us say from time to time that form follows function. What that means is the shape of the object is dictated by what it has to do. In this case, you want a bowl. It's got to hold liquid or food of some kind, fruit, so it needs higher sides so that whatever it contains doesn't just tumble right out. And it needs to have kind of a rounded edge on the inside corner, because very often you'll be using spoons to scoop out the contents. And it needs to have as absolutely smooth and even a surface as you can create. Otherwise, particles of food can be trapped in crevices and create breeding ground for bacteria. The inside of the bowl looks really beautiful now. The artist is ready to finish up the lip. Give it a nice flare around those edges. Notice how thick the lip is when it's being thrown. A decorative edge is being added with the wood modeling tool. Now you can take your wood modeling tool and trim a bit off that bottom corner. When this pot is leather hard, we'll turn the bowl over and trim the bottom to finish it. So you don't want to do all of your trimming with your wood modeling tool right now. That'll just weaken the bowl. Use your wire cutter to cut your pot away from the bat. When your pot is leather hard, it's ready to trim. Usually you don't want to use a bat when you're trimming the bottom of a pot, because most wheel heads have rings right on them, and you can use those engraved rings to help center your piece. After you've set it upside down and you think it's approximately in the middle, you're still going to have to make some adjustments. Brace your hands, hold your finger a hair's breadth away from the pot, and give it a slow spin. When it bumps or ticks into your finger, you know that you need to push it slightly away in that spot. When you think that you have it centered, take some soft but not sticky clay, overlap the lip but don't push on the lip, and anchor the clay to your wheel head. This will help hold your pot in place during the trimming process. Potter's starting his trimming by establishing a perfect circle by bracing and holding his potter's needle. That gives him the outer edge of his foot rim. Using a ribbon tool, he'll begin removing some of the clay from the bottom curve of that bowl. The clay that you couldn't remove when it was wet. You can see why they call it a ribbon tool, as long ribbons of clay are extruded as it trims. By bracing himself and holding his tool inside, he's created a little ring that shows him the edge of the foot rim. And now he's using his ribbon tool to trim up to that edge. A well-thrown pot, a smaller piece like this, should only be ½ an inch in the bottom when you're throwing. So you'd be trimming away approximately ¼ inch of clay. The resulting thickness of the bottom of the pot will be ¼ inch. The artist has created kind of a decorative edge to the foot rim. Later on, when you're glazing the pot, this gives you an easy way to determine how far to dry foot. When you're done trimming with your ribbon tools, you'll find that the surface will be kind of rough and coarse. You can take a rubber rib or your finger and just compress and smooth the clay back down. You can also round your edges just a little bit so they're not too sharp. When you sign your name, use the tip of a modeling tool. Don't use your needle. A needle does not create a beautiful line. And it's very difficult to read later after the lines shrink closer together. Remove the lugs of clay at the bottom. Your bowl's ready to dry. Sometimes when you get done wheel throwing and you're a novice, you'll find that you're not certain how thick the bottom corner wall is or the bottom. You can actually push your needle through and hold your finger at the edge of the clay as soon as you see it on the other side, and then you know how thick it is and how much you need to trim. And this piece is so well thrown, it's not going to need much trimming. Center the clay, check it, put the lugs of clay back on the bottom to hold it in place. Remember, don't push on the lip, push outside the lip, but overlap the clay on the lip. Trim with your ribbon tool. First establish that outside edge. Don't forget when you're done trimming to smooth it back down. Sign your name. Remove it from the wheel and you're ready to attach a handle. Earlier we've already shown you in another video how to extrude handles. The handle has already been extruded and laid on its side until it became leather hard in the shape the artist had determined he desired. Score the wall of the mug in 2 places. Score the ends of your handle. Apply slip. Notice that this handle is attached a little bit lower on the body of the pot. And this is because it functions more practically when the handle is lower, because the weight of the liquid is carried lower in the piece. And when you tip it to drink it, you have better control over the water sloshing or the liquid sloshing if the handle's a little bit lower on it. A lot of times you'll see handles that are added higher up. But remember, form follows function. It functions more beautifully if the user has better control over the liquid. After scoring and slipping the handle, the artist used a wood modeling tool and carefully smoothed in all the joints. He's added an extra piece for the thumb to fit on. This makes the handle much more comfortable to use. Projects that have a handle, or indeed any skinny place on it, create a shrinkage problem for the pot. Parts that are skinnier will dry faster than the rest of the piece, so they shrink faster, so they crack. To avoid that, we want to slow the drying process of skinny parts, like handles. The artist has cut a strip off a garbage sack and is carefully wrapping that around his handle. This will slow the drying of the handle just enough that it stays even with the pot, and you avoid that whole cracking problem. And the artist is gently wrapping this, not too incredibly tight, and when he gets done, he's not going to tie a knot, and he's not going to tape it all down. He's just going to tuck one end in to hold it in place. And the reason is that when this piece is finished drying, it's incredibly brittle. Greenware is an accident looking for a place to happen. And if you've wrapped your handle so tight that it can't be unwrapped to put it in the kiln, then the handle's going to break before we get the tape loose or the knot undone. Your mug's ready to finish drying so that it can go in the bisque kiln. Section of our videos, we will show you how to create 2 different styles of wheel thrown jars. To begin this first cylinder, to begin this first jar, we're going to start with a basic cylindrical shape. So the potter's just going through the usual steps to center the clay. And to open it. Pulling up the walls. And creating a nice, even cylinder. You can use your wooden potter's rib to true up the sides of your cylinder. Push gently on the inside as you scrape on the outside. If the top edge of your cylinder is uneven at all, then you'll need to trim it with your potter's needle. Remember to brace yourself and start below the lowest spot. And go back in and use your sponge to round and smooth your edges. Now the cylinder's been done, the top edge trimmed and smoothed. The bottom edge corner was trimmed with the wood modeling tool, and before the potter cuts it off the bat with the wire, he's going to measure the opening for his lid with calipers. This must be done immediately after you wheel throw the base. If you wait till later, the base will have begun its shrinking and the lid will never fit. Usually it ends up too small. There are two ways you can produce the lid. You can either produce the lid with the flange on the inside, on the jar portion, or you can produce the lid with the flange on the lid side of the jar, and it's the part that's going to fit inside the cylinder. It's really just personal taste. The artist has used a much smaller amount of clay to begin wheel throwing his lid, which will also be based largely on a cylinder for a form. You can go with a much larger amount of clay if you want a much larger, deeper lid. Remember your rules of proportion, though, when you're deciding which part becomes the largest, and try to avoid a half and half split. We're just going through the steps of centering and opening the clay, just like always. The artist has opened it past where he needs the lip to be. He's opened it past that. He's necked it back in a little bit. So make sure you go deep and square down inside that corner so that you don't end up with a lot of clay up in that lid. Remember your rules of proportion, or of wheel throwing. You don't want to suddenly make your floor or your walls too thick. Okay, we pulled it up into a nice, pretty little cylinder. The edge is smooth and nice enough it won't need to be trimmed. And the potter's coming in with those calipers now, and he's going to make sure that this fits his jar base. The artist is going to push in with his finger on the outside of the lip to push that little flange in so that it will drop and fit inside the cylinder. This will lock the lid in place so that it doesn't just fall off the jar. You can see how easy it is to make an interlocking section. All you have to do is make sure that that inside lip conforms to the caliper measurement that you just took on the base. Your fingers are so round that if you don't use a wood modeling tool right here to square it up, you'll end up with kind of a slanting portion. The lid won't fit quite as true. So take your potter's rib and clean up that corner. We want to make sure that the outside is the same size as the cylinder that was thrown earlier. That's why we're measuring with the calipers, to make sure that that's going to be the same. If it's a little too big, then you're going to push in a little bit. If it's a little too large, you'll push from the inside out a little bit. Another measurement finds it a bit closer. Okay, one last measurement. It's right on and ready to begin drying to the leather hard state. Don't forget to cut your pieces with the wire cutter, but leave them on the bat for drying. When the lid and the base are leather hard, they're ready to be trimmed. Now you don't want to trim the lid as if it's going to have a foot in it. Instead you want to trim it into usually just a nice squared off but rounded form at the top. So you're just going to have it straight across smooth and then round the corner with your ribbon tools. Okay, when you're finished with your trimming, don't forget to smooth it a little with your finger or sponge to compress those little rough particles back down smooth. And then take it off the wheel and set it aside. You can work on the foot of your jar. Here the artist is getting ready to trim the foot on the base of the jar. He's just going through the usual steps, making sure it's centered on the wheel. Once you have it centered, don't forget to put some little lugs of clay at the bottom, soft but not sticky. Use your potter's needle to start it out nice and round, and use your ribbon tools to finish trimming. Remember, your pots are worth more points if they have a foot rim trimmed into the base of the project. Okay, trimming